Okay, so for most of the Americans here of a certain age, we all know who Dick Clark was, right? Dick Clark is the guy. He had a show called American Bandstand, and he's the guy who, in fact, brought rock and roll to America. But how many of you here knew that Dick Clark had an older brother? And Dick Clark's older brother's name was Bradley. Okay, this is Bradley Clark. Now Dick Clark idolized Bradley because Bradley was not only a very good-looking young man, he was 6'2", he was a captain of the football team, he was very good athletically, very good academically, and all of those qualities got him selected into the Army fighter pilot training program right out of high school. And when he was killed, he just turned 20 when he was killed. He was killed about 40 kilometers north of here in a town called Epinal. And what happened, they went out that day, there was the only time they'd been on that airfield there at Teutonville. They took off, him and his fellow fighter pilots, they took off. They were bounced by some Germans, fighter pilots, and got in a dogfight. He was shot up, and when the rest of the pilots made it back, they thought that Bradley had been shot down, but in fact he was limping on his way back. Now when he came back, limping back, a heavy ground fog had set in. And the villagers there in Epinal, they said that probably the only thing sticking up out of the fog was the church steeple. And apparently he made a couple passes around the church steeple, attempting to get his bearings, and then he was headed towards where he believed the airfield to be. Not realizing in that ground fog there was a 4-story building, and he hit the top of the building with his aircraft. He was ejected out, killed when he hit the ground, and the aircraft went down into a ravine. Now, imagine that you're Dick Clark, you're 14 years old, and your big brother that you idolize is a fighter pilot. I mean, how cool is that? You know, your nation's at war and your big brother's a fighter pilot, and he's writing you letters home and telling you how cool it is to fly and how he's learning how to fly at government expense and all that. And then he gets killed. And according to Dick Clark's daughter Cindy and his son, who was here about 6 weeks ago, his oldest son, Dick Clark was married twice. His first wife was his childhood sweetheart. His second one was a Canadian lady from Toronto. Now Cindy and her older brother are both TV producers out in Los Angeles, or actually Rock, as he calls himself, lives in Santa Barbara. But they both basically told me the same thing. When he was killed, Dick Clark basically went into a depression. And I guess he just locked himself away in his room, and then when he'd only come out to, you know, have something to eat or to go to school or whatever. But while he was in that depressed state, and probably his only contact with the outside world was the radio. And that's what inspired him to start a career in radio. Now, Cindy told me, and Rock confirmed that, as Cindy said, she said, I knew my father quite well. He never said it, but she said my father was a very driven man. He wanted to be a success. All his life he strove to be a success, because she believed it's because he was trying to fill the void left in his parents' life by the death of Bradley. Because they were absolutely devastated with his death. The parents were absolutely devastated. He had so much promise, and they had such high hopes for him, and then he was killed. And when it came time to make a decision to bring him home, even then they couldn't bear the thought of you know, ripping that scab off and going through the funeral. So there's the rest of the story. Mr. Klein, did you know that story?
No, I did not.
And you taped it, so you're going to play it. Okay.